I've had one of those days where I've been contemplating life and what it means. Now, when I grew up, everything was out and about. You went out playing with your friends, you talked to each other, you laughed, you cried, you had an absolute awesome time. You lived. In this day and age, you see kids as little as 2 years old being taught how to use mobile phones, how to use tablets, and all of that kind of thing. So communication is changing. The world is changing. But it made me think, what is communication? Now, you think about it. We deal with electronic communications every day. Facebook, the internet, any number of different social media platforms, mobile phones, email, even TV. Everything is electronic. Now, what is that? That's all converted into electrical signals, and they get sent across the airwaves, and then they come to your phone, they come to your TV, and they are recalibrated, I guess, into what you see and what you hear. So, how does that differ from being human? You think about it. Your eyes see, your ears hear, your nose smells. Every part of your body has senses that it transmit through your body, and then they are converted into signals that your brain receives, and that then retranslates them into what you see, what you hear, and it's an understandable medium. So, what happens when somebody dies? You got to remember, we are all energy. So, what this show is all about is what happens when you get the good old phone call. And when you look down at it, it's from somebody who's died a long time ago. Hi guys, and welcome to another show. Unfortunately, Jeremy and Jay can't be with us tonight, so you've just got me all by my lonesome. And as you can tell by my little intro, tonight we're talking about phantom phone calls. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about this before, it has been reported, well, basically ever since communications started, way back. Now, phone calls from the dead, or phantom phone calls as we know it now, probably started back in the 60s. So when I say it was old school, we're talking about pre-digital, analog type phone calls. And it would revolve usually around when somebody had recently passed away, or in many cases, people who passed away a long time ago, people that you would know. You would get a phone call, and it would usually be quite staticky, and there would be just enough in there that you could hear a voice that was familiar, and there was usually just enough of a message in there to make you realize that it was definitely somebody that you knew. Now, over the years, there have been many reported cases. In fact, there have been many studies on this as well. Parapsychologists and many different people have gone in depth with this, and there have been many studies that have taken years and years and years. Now, I've got a few stories here from people who have reported such instances, and we're going to have a little bit of a chat about those. I'll read them out to you, so unfortunately I won't be looking at the lens, I'll be looking just over here. So And hopefully I can read, because with my old age and these failing eyes of mine, the writing is way too small. But never mind, we'll get on with it. So yes, phantom phone calls. Now originally, I think it was 1968 when it first came to the ears of the science community, and they didn't think much of it, but it just happened to be somebody that they knew, the individuals involved. It was somebody that they knew, and they deemed these people credible, so they looked into it. And what they did was they wrote the full report up on it. It actually made it into the papers, and there was no, with these phone calls from the dead, it's hard to study them because you have to be in the right place at the right time. And based on the nature of these things, you never know when it's going to happen. It's a familiar story for anybody who studies the paranormal. We all deal with it, whether we're talking about hauntings, whether we're talking about UFOs, the elusive Bigfoot. It's all the same. Right place, right time, and having the right gear to actually record this. So a lot of what was put down in this report was based on the reports from the people and as much information that they could finally put together. So once this story hit the papers, the response they had was absolutely overwhelming. What they discovered was that the phone calls from the dead was a far more common thing than anybody could ever believe. Anyway, over the next year or so, they were able to gather enough funding to actually go into a 2-year full-on scientific study of this phenomenon. And while with all things paranormal, you're never going to get everything that you need. It's always a matter of you've got to be there at the right time, the right place. And we all know it is very, very, very rare for that to happen. But based on all of the stories that they had, they were able to find a few common threads through all of them, which made them believe that this is a real thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually read a few of these stories and see what you think of them, because they're very interesting. Some less so than others, but what you will find is that for each and every one of these stories, it'll add a little bit to it. And being paranormal investigators, I'm assuming a lot of you guys that are actually watching this podcast or listening to this podcast are interested in the paranormal. And if you're not actively investigating, you're very keen to know more about it. And you will find that some of the stories I'm about to tell you will certainly pique your interest. Okay, this story I'm about to tell you, it's very interesting. It's actually from a social worker. So, this is how it goes. One of my clients related this story to me a few years ago. At the time, she worked for the Department of Social Services, and one of the services she offered was checking for emergency expenses. She had just issued a check for $100 to one of her clients for utilities and was about to close the file when her phone rang. On the line was the woman whom the check had been issued to. The woman sounded vague and distracted, but clearly said, "I won't be needing that $100 after all." My client made a note of it and went on with her work for the rest of the day. That evening at home, she was reading the newspaper and saw an obituary of the woman she'd just been talking with on the phone. She'd actually died a day or so before the phone call happened. So that's another interesting one. You can keep going reading all of these. There are lots and lots. Here's one. 3 years ago, my mother passed away. We were very close, and I really missed her every day. Last Christmas evening, I went to bed and woke up to the phone ringing. I answered it, and a voice that was very familiar said, "Hello there." It was my mother's voice. The line had a lot of static on it, and the sound cut in and out, and I said, "This can't be you, Mum. You're dead." She said, "Oh, come on now." She sounded a little bit agitated. and then we were cut off. My 16-year-old daughter was sleeping in the next room, and she also heard the phone ring that night. I know it was my mother's voice. She has the exact same accent and the same voice as my mum. So there you go. These stories go on and on and on. They're usually really short, and you can keep researching, and you will find that the more stories you get, the more similarities you'll find. So usually it is just along the lines of them letting you know that they're still around. And from everything I've heard, because I've been looking into this for probably over 20 years along with a lot of other things, that if you ask them questions about where they are, that's when things usually get cut off. They'll say something very general, specific to you, but general in nature, enough to let you know it's definitely them and that they are okay where they are, but they never answer anything about where they are. Did they see family members or anything like that? They won't answer any of that kind of thing. They just want to let you know that they've moved on to the next stage of their existence. So that, when you tie it in with everything else that we do in the paranormal, the similarities just, they're there, you know what I mean? When we go out and we do a paranormal investigation, we'll look at things like EVP recording. Now, what is EVP recording? Everybody out there knows what it is. It's called electronic voice phenomenon, and it is simply setting up a voice recorder, old school tape recorders if you're an analog person, and obviously digital voice recorders are the modern thing. And then you record a session where you'll ask questions, and the hope is that you will get answers back. Now, the theory behind this is with most voice recorders, they have a much broader frequency range that they pick up. So while the human ear can only pick up somewhere in the middle, obviously voice recorders pick up much further, and this is generally where we believe the voices of spirits come through. That's why quite often if you're at home and you see your dogs acting, and your cats acting very strange, it's again because they have much more acute sense of hearing than what we do, and they can see different visual spectrum to what we see as well. So that's where they can see things and hear things, and that's the premise behind EVP recording. Now, if you replace the voice recorder with a telephone, the principles are basically the same. So if a spirit can manifest things to the point that they can get their voice onto a voice recorder, it only shows that it's possible for it to happen to a phone as well, because the technology in phones these days and voice recorders are very, very, very similar. And it's something to really try, you know. You look at all the different apps around these days that record EVPs and things like that. They're using your phone. It's the exact same technology, you know. Yes, it's more advanced now. We have digital this and digital that, and you really clean audio. The old thing was back in the 60s and the 70s, when you record on the tape, you get a lot of that background noise, you know, white noise. And that is where a lot of the voices would generally be picked up, because they are that faint that you've got to make them out. Now, when you watch some of these TV shows and some of the things they pass off as EVPs, they're quite laughable because it's just a garbled mess. And what they do is they will write along the bottom of the screen what they think they're saying. And obviously the way the human mind works is when you read that and you hear it, you tend to associate the two together, and that's what you get. Now, when you've got a phone call from somebody who's passed away, even though it's still, they reckon, even with digital communication, it's still very staticky, which is unusual in itself. depending on where you are. And the messages that come through, they're coming through clear enough that you can hear a voice. And in many cases, they actually say it's as clear as if you were talking on the phone to anybody on any given day of any given week. You wouldn't know any different. It was that clear that you thought you were talking to a living person. So that leads to a whole other load of possibilities about what can spirits actually interact with. These phone calls, there are many. I think the first one I heard was way back, not actually heard the phone call myself, but the story of it was of a woman who lived in a house which belonged to an old lady. And the old lady had passed away several years earlier. And what happened was this lady moved in and she really took care of the place, this was in England, she put nice little cottagey flowers around and stuff like that. And apparently the lady who had passed away really liked what she was doing with the place. And she would get a phone call every now and then from this woman saying that she likes the flowers. And it sort of creeped her out a bit because she's going, well, who knows my phone number and who's actually looking at the flowers that I'm planting and stuff like that. And it wasn't until landlord came through, and it happened to be the daughter of the woman who'd passed away. She was renting the house out when one of these phone calls actually happened, and it came through on the answering machine while she was there. And apparently she nearly fell over because she said, that's my mum's voice. And she said this was my mum's house and she loved her flowers. And that absolutely blew away the woman that was living there. But it wasn't in a bad way, because she felt very comforted that the old lady was happy at what she was doing. So when you talk about ghost stories and phone calls from the dead and all these different things, they don't all have to be nasty, scary boogeymen, poltergeists where things are flying around the house and things like that. Quite often they can be beautiful. And a lot of these phone calls, I think, are more for the value of the living than they are for the people who have passed over, because they're already gone. But they're letting everybody know back here that you don't have to be afraid, you don't have to be sad, I'm happy. Now that then brings up the next question, and that is, if they've passed over, they wouldn't be haunting because they've transitioned across to the next phase. So how can they still see what's going on? That's what makes me think about the nature of existence, which I talked about in the intro to this episode. And what I mean by that is the common story is that if somebody dies and they've got unfinished business, this, that and the other, they don't cross over, they become an unrestful spirit, and they're the ones that generally haunt you. If somebody is totally content and very happy, they generally pass over onto the next place, and you don't generally hear much about them. But it's usually those people that we get these phone calls from. I don't think I've heard a story of a phone call being aggressive to anybody. So where I'd say it's all about existence and things like that, what is existence? This is where it gets deep and meaningful, and usually people's heads start spinning, because at what point does a person become a person? At the point of conception, or is it at the point of birth? These are questions that we don't know the answer to. Yes, all the genetic material is there, but does that mean genetic memory is there? Does that mean the soul is there? There are studies out there, and this has been documented on several shows, where scientists are trying to quantify what the human soul actually is, and does it have actual physical mass. And you can probably look it up. These scientific studies actually go into recording. They actually set people up when they know people are very close to passing away on a bed that weighs every single thing, so they know everything that's there. And I can't remember how many people the study was done over, but they did find at the actual point of passing over, there was a quantifiable difference in the weight, as in the people got, it's only a couple of grams if that, but they actually got lighter. And they would postulate the question, is that the soul leaving the person? Now, scientific theory says that energy cannot be destroyed. Energy can only be transformed. You know, when you heat up water, it becomes a gas. When you chill it down, it becomes a solid. It transforms, but it's always there. When it gets too hot, it evaporates, but then it becomes a mist, a gas, and it's always around. And then it changes further on down the track. So the human spirit is exactly the same, if you think about it, because that's the energy that drives us. You know, the human spirit is who we are at the start, but who you are now is a culmination of all the experiences throughout the life that you've had, and that's why we're all so different. But when we move across to the next plane of existence, how much do we take with us? Now, when these phone calls from the dead happen, these phantom phone calls, that would lead you to believe that you take your consciousness with you as well, to the point that you know the phone numbers to ring, or however they do it. You know, with spirits, it could be a psychical connection, you know, and it makes you wonder how far everything goes. You know, it it can go mental. We could end up talking about reincarnation. We could go on for weeks, and it all stems from these phone calls from the dead, only because they're documented. They haven't, like I said, they don't have a scientific basis to provide proof, but it happens that often, and everything has been recorded and reported in such a way that even science says there's something to it. So what do you think? Is it as simple as dialing a number on a phone? I mean, who knows where we will be? You know, the way they're talking, they're going to be implanting little chips in our heads, and it'll be as simple as thinking about somebody. Well, that is what human existence is. You and I talk to each other on a day-to-day basis out in the street. It's the same thing there. You see somebody, you hear somebody, and all those senses come from your eyes, through your ears, and all of that. Then your brain translates those signals into words, images, and things. So that's how we see and hear. A phone is exactly the same. It picks a sound up at one end of the phone, crushes it down to digital signal, shoots it through at the other end, and then reassembles it. It's exactly what the brain does. So who's on the other side of the phone calls? Where are they? Are they still here but just out of our plane of existence? Are they just slightly out of phase with what we are? Or are they in a completely different place? Interesting stuff. Anyway, my name's Gary. I think we'll call this one for now. Nice short one for a change. And we'll see you all again really soon. And as Jeremy would say, keep it spooky.